We were opening for Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers, who were a big band. They had a big hit with the McCartney song, Gotta Get You Into My Life. It was a #1 record.
In the world of progressive rock, where complex harmonies challenge all boundaries and musicians are often swept up in a whirlwind of creativity and conflict, Chris Squire stood out as a strange and unchanging figure. He wasn't the frontman on stage, nor the face of the band in the media, but amid Rick Wakeman's surreal keyboards, John Anderson's soaring vocals, and the dizzying lineup changes in Yes, there was one constant: Chris Squire, the eccentric yet powerful bassist who anchored the entire musical universe. With his Rickenbacker in hand, he forged a bass-playing style that no one has truly replicated. A blend of thunderous low-end rumble, harmonies as intricate as classical music, and the raw defiance of someone who never played by the rules. They called him the Fish, not just after the song of the same name, but because he truly lived as if drifting in his own world. A world shaped by bathtubs, studio reverb, and bass riffs so dense they seemed to weigh down the air itself. Chris Squire didn't need to say much. He didn't rely on scandals to stay relevant, and he never needed validation to keep creating. What he left behind wasn't just a collection of legendary albums with Yes. It was a sonic legacy that can't be replaced. A legacy that makes people pause, listen, and ask, has anyone ever turned the bass guitar into such a metaphysical language the way he did? What made him who he was? A quiet genius? A stubborn eccentric? Or a lonely soul forever dwelling behind the scenes? Join us on the singular journey of Chris Squire, not just to hear the music, but to feel the world he silently built behind every deep, resonant note. Early life. Chris Squire was born on March 4th, 1948, in Kingsbury, a modest suburb in northwest London. Unlike most British children of the time who grew up surrounded by train whistles, cigarette smoke, and working-class dreams, Chris was raised in a different world. A world of church choirs, scripture, and hymns echoing beneath cold stone arches. His mother was deeply religious, and it was she who introduced her young son to the choir at St. Andrew's Church, where Chris first realized that music wasn't just something to listen to, but a space to inhabit. As a treble singer in the choir, Chris quickly developed perfect pitch and a deep sensitivity to musical structure. He didn't just memorize hymns, he felt how sound resonated, rebounded, blended, and dissolved into the air. For him, music was a physical, spiritual, and almost mystical experience. But that sacred world was soon consumed by a darker obsession: the Book of Revelation. As a teenager, Chris became so fixated on the apocalypse that he was overwhelmed by intense fear, haunted by visions of destruction, judgment, and death. He began to withdraw from social life, isolating himself in his room for weeks at a time, avoiding interaction, refusing to go outside, just reading, listening to music, and trying to make sense of the turmoil inside his head. The outside world, school, friends, society, grew distant and unfamiliar. Meanwhile, Chris's inner world became more complex, darker, but also filled with sound. During that period of solitude, he began tinkering with electronics, dismantling amplifiers, plugging headphones into anything with a current, and eventually laid hands on a bass guitar, a choice made almost by accident, simply because so few others were playing it. That quiet instrument instantly consumed him. Unlike the guitar, the bass didn't shout, didn't lead the melody, but it was the foundation that kept everything from collapsing. The bass's sound was like Chris himself, deep, persistent, unpredictable, and often underestimated until it was missing. In 1964, a turning point came when Chris enrolled at Haberdasher's Aske's Boys' School, a prestigious private school where discipline reigned over passion. When the school demanded that he cut his long hair to comply with dress code, Chris refused. It wasn't youthful rebellion. It was a declaration of identity, right at the moment the mod movement and the Beatles were reshaping British culture. The result? He was suspended, and he never returned. No diploma, no plan, no traditional path. But in his hands, Chris held a Rickenbacker bass, a homemade recording setup, and a mind that had just emerged from the shadows, ready to dive into the world of music with all the chaos, weirdness, and creativity he had nurtured in silence for years. In a society that worshipped order and credentials, Chris Squire chose the path with no trail, and remarkably, he never looked back. Early career. When Chris Squire left school at 16, he didn't carry a diploma, only a bass guitar, a crackling amp, and a growing musical instinct. London at the time was exploding with sound. The Beatles had just conquered America. The Rolling Stones were outraging parents, and in every basement, pub, and warehouse, some scrappy band was screaming into the night. Chris stepped into that storm, but in his own way. Quieter, more precise, and always demanding that the sound match exactly what he heard in his mind. His first band was The Selfs, a small rhythm and blues group based in Wembley. There, Chris didn't just play bass, he began mapping out the role of the bass within the entire musical structure, transforming what was traditionally a background instrument into a central pillar. Soon after, the Selfs merged with another group called The Sin. This was where true experimentation began. Chris started playing lead-style bass lines, layering choral harmonies reminiscent of church music, and using effects like phaser and delay, things very few bassists at the time even considered. But the real turning point came in 1967, when Chris met a singer with a high, ethereal voice, dreamy eyes, and surreal musical ideas, John Anderson. They met at a rock club in Soho where Chris was performing with Mabel Greer's Toy Shop, a fairly obscure psychedelic group. Yet after just a few conversations, the two discovered something rare in the noisy world around them. A shared belief that music should be a spiritual experience, a form of meditation through sound. Chris and John began writing together, crafting songs that defied the typical verse-chorus structure, using non-linear melodies and harmonic ideas influenced by both Bach and the Beatles. They brought in keyboardist Tony Kaye, guitarist Peter Banks, and drummer Bill Bruford. Yes was officially born in 1968. But the early days were far from easy. While other bands simplified their music to get radio play, Yes wrote songs that stretched to nearly 10 minutes, with shifting time signatures, choral passages, and Baroque-style organ solos. The audiences didn't always understand them, but Chris Squire remained unmoved. He believed that if the music was genuine, the audience would come eventually. Their debut album, Yes, 1969, received a modest reception, but it was the first sketch of what would become a musical empire. Chris, with his tousled blonde hair, towering frame, and bold bass style, was quickly seen as the technical backbone of the band. Behind the scenes, he was the one quietly holding the group together, from harmonies to personnel. No one could have predicted that the boy once expelled for his long hair, the teen who had once locked himself away in fear for weeks on end, would become a trailblazer behind one of the greatest sonic revolutions of the 20th century. Successful career. Starting in the late 1960s, while many bands were taking the shortest path to chart success, Chris Squire and Yes chose the opposite route, complex, ambitious, and full of risk. But it was precisely that seemingly out-of-step direction that led them to a peak few others ever reached. Yes didn't just become a leading progressive rock band, they became a symbol of intellect, audacity, and timeless musical beauty. Chris Squire was the only member to appear on every Yes studio album from 1969 to 2014, a record not only of persistence, but of quiet, absolute influence. In 1971, Yes released the Yes album, the first time audiences truly began to notice Squire, but it was Fragile, 1971, that marked his spectacular public debut. The solo piece, The Fish, Schindleria Prematuris, wasn't just a play on his nickname, it was an artistic statement. Squire turned the bass into a lead instrument, layering harmonies, employing techniques like tapping, sliding, and delay, and creating a sonic world no one had ever imagined could come from just 4 strings. Then came Close to the Edge in 1972, hailed by critics as the pinnacle of prog rock. The album consisted of only 3 tracks, spanning 37 minutes. On it, Chris Squire wasn't just playing bass, he acted as a harmonic architect, the one responsible for threading together all the odd time signatures, overlapping movements, and bizarre key changes into a cohesive whole. He did it as if he were steering a time machine by intuition alone. One of the standout examples is And You and I, a song steeped in mythic and metaphysical tones, where Chris's bass line didn't just accompany, but moved like an underground river, pulsing, swirling, then falling silent at just the right moment. While Rick Wakeman's keyboard lines crashed like falling meteors, Squire was the gravity keeping the entire song from shattering apart. But behind the music were fractures. As Yes entered their golden era, 1971 to 1977, internal divisions began to surface. Chris Squire, though quiet on stage, wielded immense influence behind the scenes. He wasn't loud, but he directed production, chose engineers, and adjusted mixes. Some members, most notably Rick Wakeman, publicly expressed dissatisfaction with Squire's overly controlling decisions. Still, no one could deny that without Chris, Yes might have dissolved early on. He was the balancing force between John Anderson's emotional genius and Steve Howe's cold technical precision. When conflicts erupted, Chris didn't stay out, but he didn't escalate them either. He kept Yes moving forward by restructuring, rotating members, and refreshing the sound, something that traditional fans sometimes criticized, but which ultimately kept the band alive through the decades. A clear example of this was in 1983, when Yes had all but disbanded. Chris joined forces with Trevor Rabin to form a new project called Cinema. But within months, he convinced John Anderson to return. And from there, Yes was reborn with a new lineup, releasing 90125, featuring Owner of a Lonely Heart, the band's biggest commercial hit. It was proof that Chris Squire didn't just do classic prog, he knew how to survive. For over 40 years, he was both the technical cornerstone and the silent soul of Yes. Though not the lyricist, nor the public face, whenever his Rickenbacker bass rang out, listeners knew Yes was still alive and still belonged to Chris Squire. Personal life. If Chris Squire's music was always rich, sharp, and meticulously calculated down to every note, then his personal life was more like a long, deep bass tone, sometimes warm, sometimes adrift, and mostly silent. No scandals, no loud breakups, no bitter tweets. But also, few signs that he ever truly opened up to anyone, except his bass and the recording studio. Chris Squire was married 3 times, 3 distinct periods with 3 women from completely different worlds. His first marriage was to Nikki Squire, a rock singer and the mother of his first 3 children. They came together in the mid-1970s, when Yes was at the peak of its creativity, and Chris practically lived in the studio. In a rare interview, Nikki once said, "Chris never stepped out of the music. Even when he was eating breakfast, his mind was somewhere else, probably inside an unfinished solo." They were together for over a decade, but the growing distance, both physical and emotional, slowly pushed the marriage into a state of existing without connection. Chris wasn't a cruel man. He was simply absent. He might come home, but his mind stayed somewhere among the harmonic layers of Awaken or Going for the One. His second marriage to Melissa Morgan, a model and social activist, wasn't much different. They married in 1993 and divorced in 2004. The same familiar pattern emerged. Chris, absorbed in arrangements, tours, and vintage analog gear. Melissa, gradually withdrawing from the artist's world in search of her own peace. Only in his third marriage, to Scotland Squire, an independent producer, did it seem like Chris found some balance. They married quietly, without fanfare, and she was by his side until the very end. No one knows exactly why this marriage was more peaceful than the others. Perhaps Chris had aged, stopped chasing perfection, or simply learned how to listen to someone other than himself. Outside of his marriages, Chris was also known for his eccentric and solitary lifestyle. But marriage was only one element of Chris's private low frequencies. Like many rock musicians in the 70s and 80s, he went through periods of partying, hard liquor, and light drug use. Not in a way that destroyed his life like some, but rather as a slow, unchecked slide into indulgent habits. Though never arrested or involved in legal trouble, Yes did cancel or delay several shows due to members being unfit to perform. Chris was not exempt from that chaos. He didn't party like a rock star, nor was he a heavy addict, but he was famously addicted to soaking in the bathtub for hours on end. So much so that Yes members had to repeatedly send someone to pound on hotel bathroom doors to get him out for sound check. The nickname, The Fish, wasn't just a reference to the song. It fit him because he truly lived like one. Quiet, drifting, surfacing only when he felt it was time. Because of that, he was also largely absent from his children's early lives. While there were no legal battles or public disputes, some relatives described the father-child relationship as a quiet distance, not harmful, but not close either. What's notable is that Chris never denied any of it. He didn't write a memoir to explain himself, nor did he appear on talk shows to cry on camera. Instead, he spoke through his music, where every bass note carried a piece of unspoken regret. And perhaps some people are born to live half their lives in other people's worlds, and the other half in the one they build for themselves. For Chris Squire, personal life wasn't something he mastered. It was the price he paid for keeping time in a musical universe like no other. Final years and legacy. Chris Squire was never the kind of artist who said goodbye. He didn't write a retirement statement, didn't go on a farewell tour, and never appeared on television to talk about illness. Even as his body began to betray him, Chris kept touring, kept recording, still walked onto stages with his Rickenbacker bass as if music were the one part of him immune to death. But in May 2015, news began to circulate among Yes fans. Chris had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, a fast-moving, unforgiving disease. It marked the first time in nearly 50 years that his name was absent from a Yes performance lineup, something once thought impossible. Since 1968, he had been the only member present on every album, every tour, every major or minor show. In June 2015, just weeks after the diagnosis, Chris Squire passed away in Phoenix, Arizona, at the age of 67. No media spectacle, no televised funeral, no long sentimental statements. He left the world in the same way he played bass, quietly, deeply, leaving a void so profound that only in his absence did people fully grasp its size. The music community was stunned. Geddy Lee called him the boldest bassist I ever learned from. Steve Howe, his longtime bandmate, spoke through tears. Chris didn't just play bass, he built a sonic architecture for the rest of us to walk into. Even musicians outside the prog rock realm, Flea, Red Hot Chili Peppers, John Taylor, Duran Duran, Chris Novoselic, Nirvana, paid tribute, because in some way all of them had learned to breathe along to the rhythm of Chris Squire's bass. His legacy isn't just etched in albums like Close to the Edge, Fragile, or Going for the One. It lives in how he redefined the role of the bass, not as background, but as a central axis, a distinct voice with philosophy and emotion. He turned the bass into a storytelling tool, a spatial instrument capable of conveying depth and inner tension in a single phrase. Chris's signature style, playing with a pick, using chorus and phaser effects, pulling the strings like guitar solos, became a school of its own, and remains foundational study for any bassist aiming to go beyond traditional roles. Beyond technique, perhaps his greatest legacy is his perseverance and unwavering loyalty to a sonic world he believed in. Even when it was no longer trendy, no longer selling records, no longer understood by many. Chris didn't write books. He didn't build a brand. He didn't open a music school. But he lived as a living symbol, a towering bass column in the temple of progressive rock. And when he passed, that temple didn't collapse, but it undeniably lost its strongest pillar. In a world where the guitar is often hailed as the centerpiece, the singer is the soul, and the drums are the engine, Chris Squire quietly redefined the role of the bass, not as background, but as the core. From the 1970s onward, hundreds of musicians have cited him as a benchmark, not just for his playing technique, but for his musical mindset, unorthodox, uncompromising, and unconcerned with pleasing the masses. Geddy Lee of Rush once said, "Chris taught me that the bass doesn't have to be accompaniment. It can be the lead character." John Mayung of Dream Theater called him an entire world in a single left hand. Steve Harris of Iron Maiden was heavily influenced by Squire's handling of odd time signatures, transitions, and musical tension, elements that later became hallmarks of metal. Even bassists from genres far removed from progressive rock like Krist Novoselic, Nirvana, and Flea, Red Hot Chili Peppers, admitted that while they didn't follow prog structures, they were inspired by Squire's creative spirit, his willingness to be different, to make the bass a voice of its own. Many trade publications have referred to him as the bassist's bassist, an artist whose name might not be the first on the lips of the general public, but who ranks at the top in every serious musician's book. Albums like Fragile, Close to the Edge, Drama, and Relayer are still used today as teaching material in modern music theory classes. But Chris Squire's influence goes beyond music. He embodied a philosophy of life, working quietly, believing in his vision, and never needing to shout to prove his worth. In an era where artists are pressured to be visible, constantly updated, and attention-grabbing, Squire was living proof of the value of steadfastness and depth. He wasn't trendy, but he endured. Chris Squire was never considered a star in the Hollywood sense. He didn't appear on the cover of Rolling Stone, didn't make headline-grabbing statements, and never won a solo Grammy. Yet when he died, the world realized some people don't need to stand in the spotlight to be at the center of an entire generation. He was the quiet shadow behind John Anderson, Steve Howe, and Rick Wakeman. But that very shadow was what kept everything from falling apart. Chris didn't need to be remembered as a symbol because he never tried to become one. But he is remembered as the foundation without which the entire composition would feel empty. In a music world that grows louder and more rushed by the day, where everything is trimmed, edited, and formatted to fit some platform, Chris Squire's music continues to exist just as it always did. Long, deep, not easily understood at first, but unforgettable once it is. And perhaps what made Chris Squire truly special wasn't any particular piece he played, but the fact that he never stopped living as himself no matter how fast the world kept spinning.